for it.
I have a question for you too. As the inventor of the term Baptistic Congregationalists, and as somebody in the position of mentoring many young men, you made a passing comment about why do I not call myself a Baptistic Congregationalist? And yet, if you go to Twitter, there are many an account with a cool Reformed theologian in the thumbnail with sunglasses on, and the title, of who I am. I'm a seminary student at this place, Baptistic Congregationalist. What are each of your thoughts on the co-opting of this term by young men?
My thoughts are, I think that's awesome. And we want more of that, not less. No, I do think, I don't have a Twitter myself. I don't know if I did, whether I would put that in my own. It might resonate differently if I were doing it. I think that my assumption would be, not having seen what you're talking about, but my assumption would be that there's a sort of signaling there that might not necessarily be carried over, and I'm not saying a bad signaling, I just think in that sort of online space there might be a sort of signaling that wouldn't necessarily carry over to if one of those folks, planted a new church and they were going to call it the First Baptistic Congregationalist Church of wherever. But I don't know. What is that on your Twitter handle now?
No, I didn't know that it was a thing. I don't have a Twitter handle. I don't.
Oh, neither do I.
Yeah.
Do you?
Seminary has one that I read.
Yeah.
But I don't post on it. Yeah. And I didn't know that was happening. I think it's nice. I mean, young men like to follow trends, don't they? Fads, and maybe it's a fad for them. It's a good designator. I'm not troubled by it, I guess.
Yeah.
This is on your Twitter.
No.
All right, next question, Terry. Next question.
Oh, am I?
No. Yeah, you're the NC.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't actually put it on me like that, and then
Okay.
make me ask that.
Well, Matt, thanks for that. That was really good, really helpful. I want to talk about covenant theology a little bit, because you made a point that I think is a really important point, and that is that there were covenant theologies in the middle of the 17th century. And it immediately brought to mind Samuel Bolton's book, The True Bounds of Christian Freedom, because he has a long section in there in which he lays out all of the different positions that are being taken and promoted in 1650s England by his fellow Puritan theologians. It's actually very interesting to look at that. Now, the one thing about it that I've noticed is that the Banner of Truth Puritan paperback edition cuts out a lot of things. It's edited. They don't tell you that. And, for what it is, it's good, but it's not Samuel Bolton in completion. One of the things that they leave out is a long appendix that Bolton brought in John Cameron's work. And he footnotes it, sidebar, that he places it there. And he takes Cameron's position, which is largely what is reflected in 21st century Reformed Baptist covenant theology. So there is a really good source Bolton supports, cites John Cameron, and it's very similar to what most of us would hold.
And on that point, on the diversity of views, you might remember, I think there's an essay, a really interesting essay in one of the edited collections. I think it might be The Law is Not of Faith, by a guy, I want to say Ferry, on a taxonomy of covenantal.
Brandon Ferry.
Yeah, covenant taxonomy's in there, and basically it's looking at that very question. It's looking at all the different ways that folks during this period were thinking about these things. And again, to me, it reminds me a little bit of, we've been talking a lot about congregationalism, and when you have a lot of people committed to a congregational polity, but when you get down into the weeds of, okay, well, who has to vote first, and what starts what, and what is allowed, there's a lot of different variation as people are trying to tweak it and think it through.
Yep.
And similarly, and yet we'd say all those folks are congregational in a meaningful sense. And likewise, I think all the people described in that taxonomy, and I would include the Baptistic theologians are meaningfully covenantal in their approach to putting their Bibles together, though they are trying to work out all the little details.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so I was thinking when you were talking about these points of, you said, so is it, you said ecclesiology and paedobaptism are these barriers, But even within that, to go to the diversity of covenant theologies, Owen just presents a huge problem here in that his covenant theology is so aberrant to normal paedobaptist covenant theology, and yet he's still openly called a Reformed theologian.
Yeah, but I've met Presbyterians who won't allow Owen or any Congregationalists into the family. They keep
Really?
them out as well. Yes.
Like PCA type Presbyterians, or like just normal Presbyterians?
OPC type Presbyterians.
Hardcore.
Yeah, this was when I was pastoring in New England, and there was a group called NERF, New England Reformed Fellowship, that I was a part of, and some of those men wouldn't welcome Congregationalists into the family. Yeah. Now, don't take that as if that's the OPC position.
But as you said, Michael Allen is calling him a great theologian, and yet even like Tweedale's work on Owen on Hebrews, Tweedale admits, he's like, as a PCA guy, I really don't like this. I don't like a lot of these things. So again, it's just that I think there's been some helpful work done recently just on diversity in general in the Reformed world. And so does that allow the Baptist to kind of come in and say, can I be a part of that diversity a little bit?
Well, on the ecclesiology question, congregational inclusion, the fellows at the Westminster Assembly who were congregational or independent, they're called the dissenting brethren. So they're dissenting, but they're dissenting brethren, and they're invited. And actually, I think that's a much more reasonable way to approach them. Hey, actually, you are a part of this discussion. It makes sense that you're here, but we disagree on this point. And that's sort of, I think, the same logic that could have been applied to the Baptistic Congregationalists, if I can use that word.
And over time, I think, becomes more true in the 17th century. Like with figures like Owen and other dissenters kind of having more of a place for Baptists.
Let's explain one thing. When you say that Owen's covenant theology is aberrant, I think I know what you mean, but I'd like you to say what you mean.
Because that sounds bad.
Yes, it does sound bad.
Yeah,
you
sorry.
don't mean it bad.
Yeah, no. Yeah, I just mean, there's a reason that Cox uses him, the way he does, because Owen's seeing some stark discontinuity.
Yeah, so you mean different to...
Yes, I mean different to, let's say,
lines.
Westminsterian covenant theology.
Yeah. So when you say
Sorry.
Yeah. Because often that means, something really bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, maybe our PCA brothers would say it's aberrant, I suppose. Yeah.
Well, yeah.
I'm not saying.
I know someone who says that. Yeah.
You know a lot of people.
I have friends everywhere.
Yeah.
I have friends everywhere. Those of you who watched Andor recognize that quotation.
Wow. Were you going to say something, Jared? Here's a question that I'll throw open to you. It's something that gets asked to me from time to time, and I suspect you've received it a lot. You've been looking at these questions in a scholarly manner for a long time. I mentioned when I first got up there that it was reading your materials, reading Edification and Beauty, listening to some of your things online that first sort of got me interested in these questions in a more serious way. And so one question that a lot of people wonder, especially guys who are thinking about PhD study or a THM, they want to know, well, what are some areas that would benefit from further serious inquiry and exploration? And over the years, are there places that stick out in your mind as, boy, if I had more time, I'd like to look into that?
I have no time. Life is busy. I think in the current climate that we find, I think the doctrine of God needs a lot more attention from a Baptistic Congregationalist viewpoint and how it went. It's frustrating to me that most of the books that they wrote in the 17th century were about baptism. Now, there's a good side to that, and that is that they agreed, they didn't have to write books because they agreed with the broader Puritan consensus, but it still frustrates me. And I think it would be good to, for someone to do some work there. I think, too, the question of eschatology. You were talking about Hansard Knowles, you know, his book, The World That Is and the World to Come. He's got some weird ideas. I mean, you didn't mention it, but you know, he expected that the two witnesses would die in London and come back. And he also, I don't remember which year it was, expected that Christ would return in 1689, that a big event would take place. Well, it did take place, but it was William and Mary. It wasn't the Lord Jesus.
I think Keach even might say that William and Mary are the two witnesses. In Distressed Zion Relieved. You know, he thought the end was coming then. You know, that was to your point.
Yeah, so it was reading the current newspaper, although there weren't newspapers, as current events, prophetic events, yeah. And somebody needs to do some work on that, I think. Yeah.
Do you wonder if the reason for that is just because it's you know, what does this have to do with our Reformed Baptist life today? Because this is so not how we think.
Right. Yeah. It could be.
So how would you encourage someone to pursue that, despite them, when people ask and you say, I'm looking at Knowles' eschatology and how it's crazy, you know?
I would encourage them to do so that the second work that they do is applying it to today's eschatological view. You know, I was taught way back when I was in the program that the first work you do doesn't have application in it. You lay out the principles, and then you write a book after it that does the application part. Academics doesn't do application. So I would say something like that could be done. I think, too, there are major figures who need to be studied. I'm going to get in trouble right now. I want to do the Rich Barcelos thing. Where's the side door that I can run out? Oh, there it is. Okay. I don't think Keach is that important. You know, and there's a
Jared agrees. It's not controversial.
No, I agree that the Keach studies are way overblown.
Yeah.
I totally agree with that.
Yeah. And there are others who need
especially hymn singing.
Especially what?
Hymn singing. Like
the hymn singing.
You know, saying that like this is the most important, you know.
Yeah. There are others who need to be studied. Yeah.
The people want to know who.
Well, Hansard Knowles could have some study. Larry Kreitzer has done great work on Kiffin, but all he's done is publish all the documents. Somebody needs to go through them and bring out some principles from them.
Yeah, Kreitzer's work is really wonderful, what he's done, but it's more kind of, what would you say? It's like an antiquarian who's interested in just what these things say. He's not really making arguments.
So Larry Kreitzer, the work they're talking about is he's at Regent's Park College in Oxford.
Yeah, he's retired now.
And retired.
Yeah.
Still in Oxford.
Yeah.
And he published this. How many volumes is he up to? It's over. It's a lot of volumes called William Kiffin and His World. And what these volumes contain are actually primary source documents, sort of edited and transcribed and annotated very helpfully. And what's interesting about the William Kiffin and His World project is, as the name suggests, Kreitzer is not sort of just taking kind of the theological treatises and the confessional stand, the things we might immediately think about. He's actually taking things like bills of sale and burial records and kind of the primary source evidence that would have kind of formed, as the title suggests, the world in which William Kiffin lived. And I really applaud that approach.
Absolutely.
Because I think it's so easy for us to get really kind of, we imagine that these people are just disembodied theological statements floating in the spheres. And then, you compound anachronism sometimes when you see things where one disembodied sphere floater is talking to another disembodied sphere floater from like 400 years earlier, and it all can start to get an air of unreality about it unless we're grounding it in the actual historical context.
Amen. That's why they're so wonderful. So men like that need study. I think Christopher Blackwood from the earlier period. I know Robert Oliver has done some work on him. He has a conference presentation that he's done on Christopher Blackwood.
Daniel Dyke.
Daniel Dyke, yep. The Broadmead Church. I think the Broadmead Church could be studied. And
that's a fascinating document.
The Broadmead Records. Yeah. So there's all kinds of things that could be done.
Yeah. I think Henry Jesse deserves more interest. He's received some, but Henry Jesse is the figure on the front cover of Orthodox Radicals. He's the fellow pictured, and he's just a really interesting person because he kind of breaks a lot of our assumptions in terms of, we have tidy boxes and categories. And then there's, of course, the ultimate box breaker, which was the fellow that you talked a lot about, Toombs.
Yeah.
And William Kay is another one. He was also a Baptistic Church of England minister.
Yeah.
I have a question on Jesse. Have you read who is it? Dusing's.
Jason Dusing.
What do you think about that? Have you read his biography of Jesse?
Not in a way that I would want to comment publicly.
Okay, that's fine.
That's not a good thing or bad. That's not I'm aware of it. But
Yeah.
No, I don't have a
Great
take on it.
I lost my copy in my move. I can't find it.
I'm just thinking of, like, that's the only one I can think of. That's the only
probably.
biography I can think of.
Yeah. Henry Lawrence would be a really interesting study.
That's my guy.
That's
Well, don't say that one out loud. That's his second book project.
Come on.
Well, tell us about that.
Henry Lawrence, I would love to do more work on Henry Lawrence. Henry Lawrence is just a really fascinating figure. In the 1640s, so he's a cousin of Oliver Cromwell. And in the 1640s, he's publishing treatises on baptism, on believers' baptism. He publishes treatises on angels and demons. At some point then, he's Baptist, he's Baptistic, but then at some point he goes to the Netherlands and pastors the church that Thomas Goodwin once pastored. So his life is a movie. He moves back to England, and Oliver Cromwell asks him to be the Lord President of the Council of State, which there's no prime ministers at this time, but it's basically he is the second most powerful person in the government, and he's a Baptist. That's crazy.
And a Baptist with strong
that's
links to
written.
congregations.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That's written on baptism. And so, that's just really interesting.
And you know who else comes to mind is John and Lucy Hutchinson.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, you know
Who
Lucy.
you talk about in your book.
She translated Owen's Tale of Guma Pentadapa.
Yes.
So, and I found it somewhere, her translation of it. Yeah.
Lucy Hutchinson she's sort of in the conclusion of Orthodox Radicals. She forms the kind of concluding anecdote because she represents, I think, a really wonderful example of what was happening during this mid-17th century period. Namely, she describes in some detail how she's reading her Bible, she's hearing new ideas about baptism, she's comparing what she's hearing in different quarters to what she's reading in her Bible, she's talking to her husband, what do you think about this? He's sort of like, I'm not sure. They're talking to pastors that they know. And what I love about it is it's the record is detailed enough that you can get a sense of this is the actual life of this man and this woman who really lived, and they're not slotting themselves into some Baptist identity because no such thing existed, but they are aware that this conversation is happening and they're interested in it and they're taking that Berean posture towards the scriptures, and I think it's just a very lovely little distillation of some of the themes that I'm trying to put forward in the book.
And don't they end up not formally joining a church? Is that right?
Well, after he died, she became part of Owen's church.
Oh, because I knew she wasn't during his lifetime. She didn't join. She just listened to sermons and things. I didn't know if they ever joined the church.
Well, I don't know if they joined it, but that's where she attended. Yeah.
Okay.
And they came to Credo Baptist principles. Interesting. That story of meeting with the Presbyterian ministers. Where was he? Was he in Worcester or up in the north, one of the northern towns? He was the mayor, more or less. And he came to
Her husband.
Yeah,
Husband,
Colonel John Hutchinson, yeah. That whole story is fascinating. But they should
And a very well-connected family, too.
Yeah. They should be examined, and somebody should write on them. I think it would be really great.
Even the Hartops and their connection with Baptists. They don't become Baptists, but they're heavily involved in the dissenting community, and they're interested in Baptist preaching. And they are, I think, familial in some way with the Hutchisons. They're all related in some way.
Yeah. So there's lots to study, lots of work that can be done.
Can I ask you another question? Again, as someone you have looked as closely at the First and Second London Confessions as anyone, and you've written on it, and you've gone line by line, and you've taught it, as we were benefiting from today.
One woman said it was like drinking from a fire hose.
Yeah. But what a hose to drink from. So here's a question then that I think a lot of folks might wonder, in your study and in the things that I'm looking at and that you're looking at, Sharon, one of the things that we're trying to be alert to is the contextual pieces. We're talking about the Kreitzer stuff, and one of the things I really liked about the way you were kind of wrestling with the different problems and questions you were wrestling with, Jared, was the way in which you were attending to the context and thinking seriously about how ideas don't just sort of emerge fully formed out of nowhere, but actually they're real people having real conversations with real concerns. So you're very aware then that these are emerging from a very specific context, a context which in many respects is very different from our own in the 21st century. And so what is your response if someone says to you, hey, you know what, I love the theology in this document, but I'm a little uneasy about the idea of subscribing to a confession that is so historically removed, and I'm concerned, how do you talk to someone about, here's actually why it's valuable and important, and it makes sense to continue to say, yes, this 17th century document is our basis.
Yeah, the beginning of my answer to that is that it incorporates the language of the historic creeds, and thus is not merely a 17th century document, but a document that ties us to the history of the church. Where especially in chapter 8, let's start with chapter 2 and paragraph 3 on the Trinity, you have clear language from Nicaea and the Apostles' Creed. When you get to chapter 8, the order in which the work of Christ is described is exactly the order of the Apostles' Creed. You also have the Chalcedonian language without composition, without, what's the 3 C's? What is it? Without composition, confusion, or whatever the 3rd C is, yeah. But that's right out of Chalcedon. So the creed is not merely an invention of the 17th century, rather it's a reflection of the long history of Christianity that distills it in a form that is useful to us. When I was church planting years ago, we had a woman, she was from Boston, Roman Catholic, Irish, Doreen Harrington, and she called me on the phone one day, and she said, Jim, Uncle Charlie called me. And Uncle Charlie said this to me. Now, you're going to laugh at this. Uncle Charlie said, my church was started by Peter. Your church was started by Captain John Smith. No, he had the wrong John Smith, right? He's thinking Pocahontas John Smith. And if your church is so recent and my church is old, how can it be the true church? So she asked me, what do I say to Uncle Charlie? And I told her to say that. Tell her that our confession of faith ties us to the history of the church. It's not a novelty, but it's something that would be understood by the best Christians throughout all of the ages. And so that's my answer, is it reflects the history of the church. It's not a novelty. That's why we ought to adopt it.
Mm-hmm. And that sense of historical rootedness, I think, is so important to us. I think it's an encouragement. I think it's, we recognize, we're often going to be in churches and contexts that are small and unimpressive by the world's standards. And I think it's just a real encouragement to know, actually, there might only be 8 of us here at the prayer meeting tonight, but we really are linked in that way with the saints in ages past.
Right. Yeah, I don't trust myself to come to the right conclusions. I trust the consensus of those who went before me. And my confession of faith places me into that context of a consensus.
Mm-hmm.
You look like you're done, Jared.
No.
Oh, okay.
Enjoying listening.
I've got
I'm
a
enjoying
question for
listening.
you, Jared.
Yeah.
So obviously, Dr. Renihan has been doing this a long time. You're much more at the start of your scholarly journey. I know there's, folks here tonight who are maybe thinking about taking a similar journey, or maybe are making steps. Do you have any thoughts on that? Advice? How did you? Not so much the question to do it or not do it, but how did you come on to the area that you settled on, and what are some pieces of advice for someone who's thinking, I'd like to go deeper, but how did you find the topic?
Yeah, what a good question. So I went to our common supervisor with a paper that I had written in seminary on Owen's use of Augustine. And that's what I wanted to do. And I met in his office in Belfast, and we were visiting, and he read the paper ahead of time, and he said, this is very good. This would be great, like we can do this, but have you ever thought about doing Baptists? And I said, well, yeah, I did like my master's on Baptists, like I was kind of wanting to do Owen. And he says, there's lots of PhDs on Owen. But he said, Baptists are trying to figure out who they are. Why don't you do something on Baptists, and people would actually be interested in it? And here I am at a conference because I'm doing a PhD about, maybe it was prophetic.
Wow.
So anyway, so that, long story short, that's what started that, and then I kind of used the same idea. I was still interested in reception history broadly, and so instead of doing Owen's use of Augustine, I thought, okay, I'll do Baptist use of Augustine, and then that just blew up into my project now, which is Baptist use of everybody. Which I think has been really helpful. I have, and I've heard historians, talk this way, and maybe your project was similar to this. I think we try to be objective in things in our history, but the reason we choose the topics we do in many ways are existential questions that we have that we want answered. We have questions, and we want them answered, and nobody's answering them. At least that's my reasoning, and so I wanted to answer the question. And in my case, I'm seeing, retrieval theology is cool. That's something that people are doing a lot. So I'm wondering, how did the early Baptists do what we might call retrieval theology? So I'm seeing how they're reading the tradition, and then how does that make them understand themselves in light of other Christians? So yeah, I guess just my own curiosity, and just wondering how I should think about that. What about you guys? How did you choose your topics, whenever they were? Because
Whenever they were.
Whenever. Because in an interesting way, we've all I'm finishing my PhD, but we've all done PhDs on Baptists. Or Baptistic Congregationalists.
So I'll one thing that got me interested in all of this was I was a solo pastor of Reformed Baptist Church, in Albany, Georgia. I didn't have a history in that kind of church context. I wasn't raised in that in any way. I sort of found my way to it by kind of thinking through, okay, where am I, where do I fit? And we had new members classes, and we had people interested in our church, and I would tell them, among other things, so this is the 1689 London Baptist Confession of Faith, and this is, this is what we believe here, and take it home, read it, talk about it. And they would ask like really basic questions about it, like not tricky gotcha questions at all, like questions like, so who were these people who wrote this, and why did they do that? And I found myself sort of at a loss to answer them well, and that's what led me to some of your material, which helped me greatly. And then from there, what I found is just sort of questions emerge. The more you're digging into the primary sources, the more you kind of, questions arise, and you read something here, and then you read something over there, and they don't quite add up. It sparks a curiosity, and then you're off to the races. And I actually found with my PhD, I don't know if you had this, but the things I thought I was going to spend a lot of time talking about when I went in were not the things I ended up talking about, because as you get more into the source material, you find that some of the questions I was bringing were naive, and I learned quickly, okay, that's a dead end. But then other more interesting things emerge. So in that sense, I found sort of coming to a topic, as it were, kind of an organic process that sort of comes up out of immersion in the sources, rather than me bringing my questions to them in the first instance.
Yeah, what led me to do my work was I'd been a Reformed Baptist pastor since 1980, and since 84 is when I was ordained, and was going to school again, and the professors urged me to go forward. But back in the early 1990s, we had a confession of faith, but we didn't know much about it at all. We didn't know who the men were who wrote it, who adopted it. We didn't know anything about the churches. We probably knew the name Benjamin Keach, because Kriegel had the Parables book in print back then. That was about it. That was about all that there was. And so I decided that maybe I could do something that would be of help to my friends, our pastors in our Reformed Baptist churches, and give some background to the Confession of Faith, tell who they were. When I went to Trinity to do the degree, the program required you to do something in the field of ecclesiology. So that sort of narrowed my studies to ecclesiology. Tom Nettles was my first reader, my advisor, and I just started working on ecclesiology, and that was it. So I was hoping to help our churches, really. That was my motive.
And that is now edification and beauty, is that right?
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
How are we doing on time, Doug?
Yeah, it's past my bedtime.
Okay. Well, can I ask one more? I'll pose one more to you.
Sure.
So I listened to you recently on a podcast that you did, Theology in Particular, the podcast that's your podcast, IRBS.
Yep.
And the topic was the topic that I was talking on, this Reformed Baptist label, is it appropriate? And I believe, and forgive me if I'm misremembering, but I believe somewhere along, maybe towards the end, you expressed a thought that said, hey, Reformed Baptist, again, not a term anyone was using in the 17th century, not necessarily the end-all, be-all. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you had an openness to, hey, maybe there is a better title that would work better, and maybe there'd be reasons to prefer that. I think I took you certainly weren't settled on that, but there was an openness to at least considering alternatives, and I think you threw out a few possibilities. Am I remembering correctly? Can you tell us about that?
I think you're remembering correctly.
Okay. Well, I only listened to it like 5 days ago, so I hope I've.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Because of my experience at Westminster Seminary and knowing Scott Clark, who was a neighbor, and is a good man, very good pastor.
You mean literally a neighbor, like your house and his house were
around the corner from
next?
each other.
Okay.
So I knew him and am thankful for having known him, and he's a very kind and gracious man in person. But he's, well, I told him once to his face, I said, "You're two different people." "What do you mean?" And I said, "Put a microphone in front of you and you become someone different." And he laughed because he knew exactly what I was talking about. He likes to be provocative, but he's very pastoral. If a student goes to his office, he will be very kind and very helpful. And so I'm sensitive to the objections and face them a lot over 20 years. And so I'm not wed to the term Reformed Baptist. I think it's fine. I'm not opposed to it either. But I wouldn't be afraid of finding a different moniker for us. Covenantal Baptist, which clearly distinguishes us from the dispensationalists, who typically are Baptists along the way, or Baptistic. Something like that. I'm not opposed to that. And of course, we're starting up the particular Baptist Theological Society, and we have theology in particular, so we picked up that historical name. That's why the podcast doesn't have Reformed in the title of it. We were looking for something else to use, and theology in particular came to us. So I think it's a fine name. I loved what you said. I thought it was excellent. Really well done. Thank you for that. But you know, if we give offense to people, maybe it's better not to use it and find another way to describe ourselves. That's my thinking.
Yeah. You okay with it?
Great.
I did, sorry. Did you find any instances of Reformed Baptist, those words conjoined in your research? And you didn't either?
No, I mean, the common term in England, right, is the Reformed Protestant religion, which interestingly ends up not just meaning state church, I don't think, or, you know, state idea, but just comes to mean in dissenting era, comes to even dissenters are using Reformed Protestant religion, just to say Orthodox, not Arminian, not anti-Trinitarian.
Yeah, and just to clarify that, I think there's lots of uses of Reformed without respect, talking more about the theology and tradition, but when I've seen that word Reformed churches, I've mostly seen them in connection with that.
I did like a whole word study on this, and I've thought about writing a paper on it, is that even these folks that we're talking about using the term Reformed themselves, that is still even another problem. Because I think that there's some anachronism in the use of Reformed in general. Because it doesn't seem like it was being used in the 16th and 17th centuries, how it's being used as that bludgeon to say you can't be Reformed.
You know, it's interesting. I think it was Thomas Edwards in Gangrena. Imagine this. You know what Gangrena is. He was the equivalent of the internet muckraker today. That's what Gangrena was. That was the name of his book. It was about, he gathered up every bit of dirt that he could find, whether true or false, and threw it at people. And in the book, it's right around 1644 when the First London comes out, and he makes a statement which is astounding, that it's like the confessions of other Reformed churches. Think about that, like other Reformed churches. He doesn't believe it, of course. He saw it too late to get into the book, so it's like a paragraph that's appended to the end of one of the chapters. Interesting that Edwards said that.